On a gray April afternoon, inside a quiet hotel room in suburban Maryland, the picture of a perfect family shattered. There were no screams, no breaking news alerts, just a housekeeping call that no one answered. What investigators found behind that locked door would shake the world, spark a federal investigation, and leave an entire community asking the same impossible question. How does a family simply vanish?
Baltimore County 911.
Yes, ma'am. I'm calling from the Sheraton, Baltimore North.
Yes, sir.
We have a dead body in one of our rooms, ma'am.
It was the afternoon of April the 20th, 2009, when staff at the Sheraton Hotel in Towson, Maryland, noticed something strange. Room 1029 hadn't checked out. The cleaning staff made their way up to the room, only to find a horror awaiting them. Lying motionless in the room were 4 bodies. A man, a woman, 2 girls, a whole family gone altogether. The police were called immediately, and soon the room was sealed off. Crime scene tape went up. Investigators arrived to take over. Inside, they found the victims, a man, a woman, and 2 young girls. The man was identified as 59-year-old William Parente from Garden City, Long Island. The woman was his wife, Betty, 58 years old. Lying near them were their daughters, 19-year-old Stephanie, a college student at Loyola, and 11-year-old Catherine. A whole family gone. At first, the room didn't look like a struggle had taken place. No gunshots. No signs of forced entry. Just the eerie stillness of a place that had witnessed something unthinkable. When autopsies were performed, the cause of death was revealed. All 4 had died from asphyxiation. Someone had taken their lives. What had happened in that hotel room? And who could have done this? Before the tragedy at the Sheraton, the Parente family looked, from the outside, like any other nuclear family. William Michael Parente, the father, grew up in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, an only child raised by Willie and Rocalyn Parente. His father was a New York State trooper, a figure of discipline and authority. Summers were spent on the beaches of Long Beach, New York, and the young William seemed to follow a straight path from the beginning. With the help of his generous uncle, William went on to earn a degree from Brooklyn College and subsequently attended Brooklyn Law School. He built his career carefully, step by step, eventually opening an office on the Avenue of the Americas in Manhattan. Colleagues described him as reserved, courteous, maybe even a little old-fashioned. He wasn't the kind of man who joined in for after-work drinks or traded gossip. He was polite to a fault, loyal to his longtime secretary, and stayed late at the office, but never too late to miss dinner at home. In 1977, William married Betty Mazzarella. Their bond seemed solid. When Betty became pregnant with their first child, William made a big move. He left the Wall Street law firm he'd joined and opened his private practice in 1988. From that point on, his professional life revolved around the idea of earning great money, achieving independence, and security. The family eventually settled in Garden City, a quiet, upscale community on Long Island. But they never left Brooklyn behind. They'd often visit William's mother, stop by old bakeries for cannoli or fresh mozzarella, and every Halloween, William brought his daughters back to his childhood street for trick-or-treating, just like he'd done as a kid. These weren't distant memories. They were traditions he insisted on keeping. Stephanie, their eldest, was thriving in college. Catherine, their youngest, full of curiosity, was just starting to discover the world. But behind that image of stability and tradition, something had started to unravel. Later in his career, William had shifted his focus to something called bridge loans. Short-term, high-risk loans made to developers waiting on permits. As one friend put it, He essentially worked as a bank. But unlike a real bank, William was pulling from investment funds entrusted to him, money that wasn't entirely his. Eventually, the cracks started showing. One investor wanted their money back. William couldn't deliver, and when pressed for an explanation, he had none. Whatever was happening behind the scenes, it wasn't just a legal or financial crisis. It was something deeper, more dangerous, quietly closing in on the family long before they checked into that hotel room in Maryland. And just like that, what started as an individual dream turned into an absolute horror for the whole family. The timeline was murky at first, but as investigators began piecing it together, a deeply unsettling picture emerged. The murders hadn't happened all at once. Each one had its own time. Police believe the first to die was Betty Parente. Sometime during the day on April 19th, inside the quiet walls of room 1029, something happened. As we mentioned, Betty was killed and gently laid on one of the beds. Not long after, Catherine followed. Two bodies, side by side, carefully placed, as if someone wanted them to look peaceful. Meanwhile, Stephanie was still on campus. The 19-year-old was in the middle of studying for a chemistry exam. Books out, plans set, routine unchanged. Her friends had no reason to think anything was wrong. So when Stephanie suddenly told them she was heading out to meet her family, who had come to visit her, they were caught off guard. The visit hadn't been expected. Still, she packed up and left for the hotel. Later that day, sometime Sunday evening, Stephanie was also killed. That meant whoever had done this had waited with two bodies already in the room, waited for the third. And then Stephanie arrived, completely unaware of what she was walking into. But the story didn't end there. Around midnight, Stephanie's roommate called the Sheraton just to check in. She'd been worried. Something felt off. A man picked up the phone. It was William Parente. He calmly told her that Stephanie had been staying there. The roommate believed him. She had no reason not to. But something about his voice stuck with her. Later, she described it as odd, like he wasn't himself. But at the time, it was just a strange phone call. William would get off the call, look behind the people lying peacefully on the bed, the people he had just killed. Hours passed. At some point during that window, he left the hotel, walked into a store, and purchased a knife. That detail changed everything for detectives, because it meant he'd made a conscious decision to return to the room, to go back and sit with their bodies, to delay what would eventually come next, his own death. What was he thinking during that time? What did he plan to use the knife for? The answer would come when hotel staff finally entered the room. And when they found William lying in a pool of blood, suddenly, the purpose of that knife became clear.
We do have some developments from overnight, and literally they really just came this morning. It is with some sadness, though, that we report that a whole family is dead.
Finding out why it happened was the hardest part. Friends, neighbors, even colleagues, all of them asked the same thing. What could drive a man like William Parente to kill his entire family? He had a good career, a comfortable home in the suburbs, a picture-perfect family. But behind the polished surface, something dark had been building. Quietly, relentlessly. While Baltimore County Police were piecing together what had happened inside room 1029, they uncovered something else. A second investigation, happening hundreds of miles away. The FBI had already been looking into William Parente, and what they found was staggering. Parente wasn't just a struggling lawyer. He was the center of a growing financial scandal, one that destroyed not just his family, but also the ones involved. The FBI was already digging into Parente's finances, but now the New York Attorney General's office was stepping in too. Their interest had been sparked by a letter, one that would quietly blow the lid off what Parente had really been up to. The letter was written by Bruce Montague, a lawyer from Bayside, Queens, and addressed serious concerns about Parente's dealings. Montague had invested private funds with Parente, only to find his checks bouncing, and he wasn't alone. Craig Gardy, Montague's colleague, later read out a statement on his behalf. All monies involved were private money that can be replaced. What Mr. Parente did to his family is a great tragedy and unforgivable. That tragedy was already making headlines, but behind the scenes, the financial mess was unraveling even faster. According to Gardy, Montague's losses totaled over $100,000, but others had it worse, much worse. Investors were calling in, stunned, betrayed, and financially devastated. One after another, saying they'd lost $500,000, $1 million, or even more. Some claimed to have lost entire savings, retirement accounts, gone. To them, William had seemed cautious, conservative, a safe bet. But when his financial world started collapsing, William didn't ask for help. He didn't come clean. He buried the panic and made a choice that would destroy more than just reputations or bank accounts. As more conversations unfolded, lawyers began to estimate that the total losses from Parente's alleged scheme could surpass $20 million. And suddenly, it became horrifyingly clear. William Parente wasn't just a husband and father. He was a man living a double life, one that had finally collapsed in the most devastating way imaginable. The FBI would later clarify that their investigation into Parente's financial activities remained open, and that it was being handled separately from the tragedy. But for everyone left behind, the damage was already done. What started as a white-collar scheme ended in the most unthinkable violence. And in the end, Parente's betrayal left no survivors, not even the ones who were alive. As the scope of Parente's financial deception widened, so did the horror of what he'd done inside that hotel room. Investigators still couldn't say exactly how he carried out the murders. The autopsies revealed signs of asphyxiation and blunt force trauma, but the weapon, or method, remained uncertain. Had he smothered them? Beaten them? Had it all been planned? Or was this the desperate breakdown of a man watching his world collapse? No note was left behind. No explanation. Just silence. Chief Johnson of the Baltimore County Police stated that they would continue to interview family, friends, work associates to try to determine the motive and circumstance of these violent acts. But what motive could possibly explain something like this? A crumbling Ponzi scheme? Fear of exposure? Shame? Or was it something darker? Something that had been building long before the checks started bouncing? Some questions might never be answered. But one thing is certain. Behind the image of a quiet, respectable man was a storm no one saw coming. 2 days later, on a stormy Wednesday night, the grief spilled out into the streets of Garden City. A memorial mass for the Parente family was held at St. Joseph Roman Catholic Church.
In the deserted Parente home, Joe Mazzarella and 3 family members come to pick out dresses to clothe their 2 dead nieces for the funeral. Can you tell us how you're doing?
I'm not doing very well, sweetheart. If you're missing 3 people that were dear to you, you wouldn't even ask that question. All right? So please,
Yes,
no
sir.
more. Okay, please.
What happened afterward that truly captured the heartbreak? In the pouring rain, about 75 sixth graders, children who had likely laughed and learned beside Catherine, stood silently outside the Parente home, each holding a candle. They spoke in hushed tones, flickers of flame reflecting off their tear-streaked faces, while their parents lingered behind them, quiet and stunned. No one could understand how such darkness had crept into such a picture-perfect family, and maybe no one ever truly would. As this case settled into the shattered hearts of the people who were left mourning, there was another family grieving the loss of their loved ones who were murdered just 4 days before this incident. On April 17, 2009, the town of Middletown, Maryland, was shocked by a horrifying discovery. Christopher Allen Wood, a 34-year-old husband and father, had annihilated his entire family, his wife Francie, and their 3 young children, before turning the gun on himself in their home. The bodies were found by the children's grandfather, who arrived at the house the day after the tragedy. In the quiet halls of their suburban home, the lives of Francie and the kids, 2-year-old Chandler, 4-year-old Gavin, and 5-year-old Alana, were taken with a .25 caliber handgun. Their mother, Francie, just 33 years old, had also been fatally shot. Christopher had left 6 handwritten notes behind, scattered throughout the home. In them, he wrote of the family's financial burdens, bills they couldn't pay, credit cards maxed out, and a mortgage they were struggling to keep up with. But even in those notes, there was no clear explanation for the inexcusable choice he made for his whole family. It started with something so small, something that, on any other day, might have gone unnoticed. On a quiet Friday morning, Jane Durant, director of the Middletown United Methodist Church preschool, noticed one of her students hadn't shown up. A bright-eyed 4-year-old boy, usually dropped off by his mother, Francie Wood. The boy had been there the day before, picked up by Francie herself on Thursday morning. Nothing had seemed off. Francie smiled, exchanged a few words like she always did. Everything appeared normal. But Friday, there was no sign of them. At first, Durant chalked it up to illness or a family errand, but a nagging feeling crept in. Francie never missed a day without calling. Something didn't sit right. That same worry started to stir in others, especially Francie's father, who hadn't heard from the family in days. On Saturday morning, around 9 a.m., he couldn't ignore it any longer. He drove over to the family's home in Middletown. What he found inside that house would scar him forever. The silence hit first, then the smell, and then the sight of a massacre that would be the reason for his nightmares for the rest of his life. Middletown is a small, peaceful town west of Frederick, with fewer than 3,000 residents. Because of Francie, they had returned to Middletown from Texas just the year before, as she wanted to raise her children closer to her own family. It was a quiet decision made out of love, one that should have given her and her kids a better, more rooted life. Neighbors described Francie Wood, as the kind of woman who made a house feel like a home. Peggy Lawrence, who lived nearby, remembered her as a warm, attentive homemaker. "It wouldn't lead you to believe anything was wrong," she said, her voice still trembling. "I'm still sick to my stomach. Just to see it end so quickly is so devastating and makes you realize you never know what's going on in people's lives." Jane Durant, the preschool director who had last seen Francie alive, struggled to find the words. She was vibrant, bubbly, so loving, she recalled. "I just talk to her every day, and she's one of those people you fell in love with right away." And now she was gone, along with her 3 kids, taken in the most horrific way imaginable. No signs, no warnings, just a facade of normalcy that hid the storm brewing behind closed doors. No one saw it coming. No one ever does. Francie's father made his way inside the two-story suburban home. The kids were still in their beds. 5-year-old Gavin and 4-year-old Chandler lay lifeless, just as they would have slept. In the master bedroom, 2-year-old Alana was next to her mother, Francie, both of them dead. And there, at the foot of the bed, lay Christopher Wood, dead from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. But the horror didn't stop there. As investigators began piecing together the scene, the Frederick County Sheriff's Office uncovered a truth far more disturbing than the horrors that happened in the Woods house. Their lives were not just taken brutally by the father. Right after, Christopher had taken a kitchen knife and a saw and tried to mutilate them in a horrifying attempt. The act was brutal, methodical, and almost ritualistic. It was as if he was trying to erase them, erase the evidence of their lives. So what drove him to this unthinkable act? On paper, Christopher Wood was doing well. He earned $97,000 a year as an account manager in the sales and marketing department at CSX Corporation in Baltimore. But behind the numbers was a financial freefall. The family was buried in $450,000 of debt and trying to sell a second home in Florida. Christopher had been silently battling depression, spiraling under the weight of financial pressure and hopelessness. No one knew just how far he had fallen until it was too late. Days later, the toxicology report offered a chilling glimpse into his state of mind. According to findings obtained by the Frederick News Post, Wood's bloodstream had 7 different drugs coursed through his system: oxycodone, zolpidem, alprazolam, nortriptyline, amitriptyline, bupropion, acetaminophen, 2 powerful painkillers, 1 sleep aid, 1 for anxiety, and 3 different antidepressants. To some, it was a revelation. To others, it was only more disturbing. Because if he had been seeking help, if he had seen doctors, taken pills, tried to keep the monster at bay, then what went so horribly wrong? No one had the answer. Only the aftermath remained. A mother and 3 children gone too soon, and a community still reeling, left with grief, confusion, and the terrifying realization that evil doesn't always show its face. Sometimes it hides behind a smile and a locked front door. The stories of the Parente and Wood families leave behind more than just headlines. They leave questions no one can fully answer. Behind closed doors, even the brightest smiles can hide the darkest battles. In both cases, the signs were there, but missed. And while the grief lingers, so does the lesson. Sometimes the real tragedies are the ones no one sees coming. If a picture-perfect life can hide so much pain, how many more families are suffering in silence?
This disturbing pattern of shattered facades isn't unique to their story. Just a few years earlier, another seemingly idyllic family met an equally shocking fate that would leave investigators questioning everything they thought they knew about domestic bliss. Let's revisit the case that first opened our eyes to how deadly these deceptions can become: the Entwistle family massacre.
And the family loved them. Everyone seemed blissfully happy.
Rachel set up a website, Neil and Rachel, and she was constantly updating people on how perfect her life was and how beautiful her baby was and how handsome her husband was.
They say you can choose your friends, but family is forever. Or is it? Neil Entwistle had everything: a devoted wife, a baby daughter, and a serene home in Massachusetts. But in one terrifying instant, that family bond was broken in ways no one could have imagined. What really happened to the perfect life he seemed to have? This case has captured the attention of true crime documentaries, popular YouTube videos, and even a gripping book, with jurors calling it a story of unimaginable and unforgivable family murders. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why. On January 22, 2006, Neil Entwistle left his home around 9 in the morning to run some errands for his wife and their beautiful daughter. But when he returned, his world turned upside down. He discovered that both his wife and daughter had been shot dead, and he had no clue who could have done such a terrible thing. Neil claimed he was so heartbroken upon seeing the bodies that he considered taking his own life. But when it came to actually ending it all with a knife, he just couldn't go through with it. Instead, he hopped into the family car and drove over to his mother-in-law's house to get a .22 caliber revolver. Unfortunately, the house was locked up tight, so he told the police he decided to fly back home to England to see his parents. The news hit everyone hard. Friends and family described the Entwistles as a loving and friendly family with no known enemies. So the big question on everyone's mind was, who could have killed them?
There was no sign of a break-in, there was no sign of theft. Valuable items were laying around and none of which were touched.
To get a clearer picture, let's take a closer look at this couple. Neil Entwistle and Rachel Entwistle had been married for 3 years, but their journey together started long before that. They first met while Neil was studying at the University of York, where he was working hard to earn a master's degree in electronic engineering. Growing up in Worksop, Neil lived with his parents, Clifford and Yvonne, and his younger brother, Russell. Their family was solidly working class, with his dad toiling as a coal miner and his mom cooking in the school canteen. Now, life in Worksop was pretty typical for a coal mining town, and while Neil and Russell had a normal childhood, Neil often felt a little embarrassed about their background. He dreamed of a fancier life, something that felt just out of reach. In fact, Neil had always been shy and often battled feelings of inadequacy, especially when it came to his Cockney accent at university. But everything changed when he met Rachel Souza. Born on December 14, 1978, in Weymouth, Massachusetts, Rachel had her own story. She lost her father, Paul, when she was young, which shaped her into a strong and determined person. Interestingly, Neil and Rachel met at the same university because Rachel had applied for a study abroad program at the University of York, the same place where Neil was working hard to earn his master's degree. As Neil and Rachel got to know each other, they found a special connection that made them feel like they could take on the world. They fell in love, with Neil often declaring that Rachel was the one, the person he wanted to spend his life with. After graduating, Rachel is also determined to start a new chapter with Neil. They settled in Redditch, about 15 miles south of Birmingham, where Neil landed a job with a computer company. Rachel found her passion teaching English and theater at St. Augustine's Catholic School. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every day, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing, it helps a lot. Going back, Rachel and Neil's wedding took place on August 10, 2003, at the Second Parish Church of Plymouth in Massachusetts, a beautiful day marking the beginning of their life together. Fast forward 2 years, and on April 9, 2005, they welcomed their daughter, Lillian, into the world. Everything seemed perfect, and those who knew Neil and Rachel personally often described them as a cute, loving family. Rachel thrived at St. Augustine's, where she formed close bonds with her fellow teachers and students. Outside of work, she built a solid circle of friends and a vibrant community, always bringing warmth and laughter to those around her. But for Neil, things weren't as rosy. He struggled to find his footing in this new life. Weighed down by insecurities about his working-class roots and his thick Worksop accent, he felt like an outsider. No matter where he went, he couldn't shake the nagging feeling that everyone was judging him for how he spoke and where he came from. This internal battle held him back from pursuing better opportunities in England, leaving him feeling trapped in a life that didn't fully reflect who he wanted to be. Feeling insecure and ready for a change, Neil was on the lookout for a fresh start, maybe even a chance to find his true calling. So he suggested that they pack up and move to Rachel's home state of Massachusetts. And while Rachel loved her job and had made some great friends in Redditch, the idea of being closer to her mom and stepdad Priscilla and Joe excited her. With little Lillian in the mix, she couldn't wait for her parents to play a bigger role as grandparents. When it came time to move, Neil told his job he had some personal stuff to figure out, and that heading to the States was the best way to keep Rachel happy. But here's the catch. He didn't tell anyone, not even Rachel, that he had actually quit his job. Instead, he let her and her family think he was still working remotely for the computer company. And after making the big move back to Massachusetts, Neil and Rachel started spending more time with her family. One day at a family gathering, Neil went shooting with Rachel's stepdad, Joe, and her brothers. Joe pulled out the lockbox where he kept his guns, and while Joe and the brothers picked theirs out, Neil, being inexperienced, opted for the smallest gun, a .22 caliber revolver. It was his first time shooting a gun since moving. Although Neil and Rachel were living with her parents, they were eager to find their own place. They set their sights on a house in Hopkinton, a town famous for being the starting point of the Boston Marathon. The house, located at 6 Cubs Path, was in a quiet cul-de-sac and had 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, and a spacious 2,400 square feet, perfect for their little family. As mentioned, Neil wasn't bringing in any money. So how were they going to afford this dream home? Well, Neil managed to convince the owner to let them rent it on a short-term 3-month lease for $2,700, plus an upfront payment of $5,400 for the first and last month's rent. He told the owner he was just waiting for his offshore accounts to transfer to the U.S. so they could buy the house. Around this time, Rachel tried to use one of Neil's credit cards, only to find it was frozen. After that incident, she confronted Neil about their finances, but he refused to answer her questions. By this point, Neil had piled up about $40,000 in credit card debt. Obsessed with living an upper-class lifestyle, Neil wanted to shake off the humble beginnings he grew up with and be seen as part of the elite. This desire pushed him to come up with some pretty questionable ways to make money. He spent a lot of time creating scam websites that promised people they could get rich quick with pyramid schemes. One of these sites, called millionmaker.co.uk, claimed participants could earn $6,000 a month within the first 6 months of signing up, charging a $90 setup fee and $25 a month for support for people running online adult businesses. Neil's second venture was a company called Embedded New Technologies Limited. The website had no products or services listed, but had Neil as the main contact. Then there was Senior Publications, which promised earnings of $20,000 a month by spending only a couple of hours a week online. The ad didn't specify what was being sold, but charged $60 to join. He also created a porn site that featured barely legal women and even had a site advertising penis enlargement methods. On top of that, he seemed to have an online gambling issue. Court records later showed that in the month before Rachel and Lillian's deaths, he lost hundreds of dollars on a gambling site called Casino One, which was run by a company based in Gibraltar. To make matters worse, Neil was selling CD-ROMs of his get-rich-quick schemes on eBay, calling them business manuals. But around 2006, he started taking people's money without delivering the CDs. This got him in hot water with eBay, which ended up shutting down his account and launching an investigation. While Neil was busy scamming people online, Rachel was focused on settling into their new home. She was unpacking boxes and getting everything organized for a visit from her old college friends. Rachel wanted everything to be perfect for her friend's visit, so she was working hard to get the house in order. Between unpacking and taking care of Lillian, she was totally wiped out by the end of the day. After putting Lillian to bed, Rachel would head off to sleep, leaving Neil with plenty of time to himself. During that same week, Neil's Google search history was very alarming. He looked up things like quick suicide methods, best way to kill someone, and knife and neck kill. He even found an online forum where someone suggested it was better to stab someone just below the rib cage instead of going for the aorta. And he didn't stop there. Neil was also busy online searching for escort services. On January 16th, he checked out Adult Friend Finder and another site called halfpriceescorts.com. Just 2 days later, he was looking for escorts in Westboro. Then, on January 18th, he logged back into both Adult Friend Finder and halfpriceescorts.com again. He even downloaded a map for blonde beauty escort services in Worcester, which is about half an hour from Hopkinton. But that wasn't all. Neil also searched for flights to the UK on sites like flymanchester.com, lastminute.com, British Airways, and Manchester Airport. It was pretty clear he had a lot going on in his mind. On January 20th, 2006, Neil left the house that morning, telling Rachel he was going to the mall to pick up some computer stuff. But that was a total lie. Instead, he went to his in-laws' house, which was empty at the time. Using a spare key, he let himself in and headed straight for the box where Joe kept his guns. He took out the .22 revolver, the same one he had shot for the first time not long ago. After grabbing the gun, he returned home, where Rachel was upstairs in their bedroom with Lillian. Although it's never been confirmed what exactly happened, authorities believe Rachel and Lillian were in the primary bedroom when Neil came in with the revolver. At this point, it was clear that the person behind the shocking murder wasn't just a stranger, he was someone who had been part of their lives for years. Reports say that Rachel was holding little Lillian when Neil turned the gun on them. Rachel took a bullet to the head, and Lillian was shot in the abdomen, with the bullet also hitting Rachel right under her breast. That evening, Rachel's friends, who she had been so excited to see, showed up at the house. When no one answered the door, worry set in. They called Rachel's phone, and to their dismay, they could hear it ringing inside the house. Then they spotted a note from Priscilla, Rachel's mom, which only made them more anxious. Feeling something was really wrong, they called Priscilla and rushed to the Hopkinton police station to report Rachel missing. A couple of patrol officers at the station decided to check on the Entwistles. When they arrived at the house, they noticed that all the windows and doors were locked. One of the officers cleverly used a card from his wallet to unlock the front door. Inside, they found the TV still on, and the family dog, Sally, a basset hound, barking from her crate. At first, the officers worried that the family might have been affected by a carbon monoxide leak, but seeing Sally alive put that thought to rest. As they made their way upstairs, the officers heard classical music coming from what they guessed was Lillian's room. They also noticed a bathtub full of cold water, suggesting someone had been getting ready for a bath. In the master bedroom, the bed looked like it had been slept in, with sheets and comforters tossed carelessly. Still, no one was home. Noticing that the family car was missing from the garage, the officers ran the license plate to check if it had been involved in any accidents. That day, they didn't find anything suspicious. The authorities figured that maybe the Entwistles had to rush out for some emergency, since the plates were still on the table and there was no blood or anything strange around. But the friend who was worried about Rachel refused to leave without getting some answers. Even though it was freezing outside, she and her sister, who was also Rachel's friend, decided to park their car right in front of the Entwistle house and spend the night there. They had been warned not to go inside to avoid messing with any potential evidence. The next day, the patrol officers returned for another search of the house. This time, as they walked in, they were hit by a terrible smell. Following the stench upstairs, they made their way to the master bedroom, where the odor grew stronger. One officer decided to lift the covers on the bed, a crucial step they hadn't taken the day before. To their horror, he discovered a woman's foot. Pulling back the covers fully revealed the lifeless bodies of Rachel and Lillian. The officers quickly called for backup and the medical examiner, turning the Entwistle home into a crime scene. Meanwhile, the family's white BMW was located at the airport, with the keys still in the ignition. That same day, Rachel's parents received a call from Neil's father, Clifford. He shared that Neil had called him the day before, claiming he found Rachel and Lillian dead when he returned home from the mall. In a state of panic, Neil said he called the police and then drove to their house, but neither Priscilla nor Joe was home at the time. Clifford expressed his concern, saying Neil was distraught and had decided to catch a flight back. But the bizarre events didn't stop there. After hanging up with Clifford, Rachel's parents received a call from Neil himself. He told Joe a story similar to Cliff's, but conveniently left out mentioning that he called the police, likely because Joe would know that no one had done that the day before. On the 23rd of January, 2006, Neil received a call from Massachusetts State Police Sergeant Robert Manning. It was bold of Manning to reach out to Neil, and even bolder for Neil to stay on the line for nearly 2 hours. When Manning delivered the devastating news that his family was dead, Neil simply replied, "I know," leaving Manning in stunned silence.
My goal for the whole conversation was to obtain as much information as I could.
Throughout the conversation, Neil recounted a version of events that mirrored what he and Clifford had told Joe, insisting that no one would have known Rachel and Lillian were home alone. Manning probed Neil's actions, questioning why he hadn't contacted the police or reached out to Priscilla or Joe after discovering the bodies. Neil explained that he didn't have their work numbers and had gotten lost trying to find Priscilla. Then, in a troubling revelation, he shared that after finding Rachel and Lillian, he had wanted to end his own life. Manning pressed him for details, asking why he felt that way. Neil replied that he simply wanted to be with his wife and daughter. He mentioned planning to retrieve a .22 pistol to take his life, but authorities suspected he actually intended to return the gun he had used to kill them, knowing that Rachel's parents would be at work. In another call with Manning, Neil explained he left the keys in the ignition of his BMW at the airport because he didn't think he would need them. When Manning asked if he planned to return to the U.S., Neil reportedly replied, "I don't know. Why would I do that?" He also contacted the landlord of his rental house, saying he no longer had interest in it and requested his security deposit back, talking about Rachel and Lillian's belongings as if it were business as usual. A couple of weeks later, services were held for Rachel and Lillian, but Neil did not return for them. One day, authorities got a tip that Neil had left a friend's house in Scotland and was on a train. Fearing he was trying to go into hiding, they stopped the train and arrested him. During the arrest, they found a news clipping about escort services, and it was later revealed that Neil had been browsing escort sites in the days following Rachel and Lillian's deaths. Back in the U.S., a judge issued an arrest warrant for Neil. When he waived his rights to extradition, he was quickly brought back. Soon after his return, Neil began changing his story. He claimed that when he found Rachel and Lillian, he immediately thought it was a murder-suicide. He said he found Joe's .22 revolver near the bodies and believed Rachel had killed Lillian before taking her own life. This time, he said he returned the revolver to the Mozo house and put it back in the lockbox. Neil claimed he didn't call the police because he wanted to protect Rachel's honor, not wanting anyone to know she had killed Lillian and herself. This twist in his story was not only a blatant lie, but also deeply insulting to Rachel. Her family was horrified at the suggestion that Rachel could do something so horrific. They couldn't believe Neil would stoop so low, especially when his story was not just a self-preserving lie, it was also physically impossible. Authorities confirmed that Rachel had been holding Lillian when they were shot, and the length of the gun made it impossible for her to have shot them both. As the trial approached, Neil's defense team made 2 significant requests to the judge. First, they sought Neil's release on bail, arguing that he should return to the United Kingdom to live with his parents until the trial commenced. They also requested that all evidence collected from the Entwistle home be excluded, claiming officers had entered without a search warrant. Both requests were ultimately denied. The judge ruled that officers were legally allowed to enter the home given the circumstances, and since the investigation technically began when Rachel and Lillian were found, all evidence collected was admissible during the trial. And when it's time for the trial to take place, Neil's defense did not call any witnesses, and he did not testify on his own behalf. They attempted to argue that Rachel had used the gun since her DNA was found on it. However, it was important to note that the DNA was only detected around the inside of the barrel. No DNA from Rachel was found on the gun's grip. That distinction belongs solely to Joe, his sons, and Neil. While Neil's DNA could have been left when he previously handled the gun with Joe and his sons, the critical fact remained. Rachel's DNA was absent, serving as proof that she had not used the gun herself. Eventually, Neil was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced him to 2 life sentences without the possibility of parole. When he heard the verdict, he broke down, but quickly put on a stone-faced expression.
Guilty of murder in the first degree of Lillian Entwistle.
After a day and a half of deliberations, a jury found Neil Entwistle guilty of murdering his wife and infant daughter.
After the sentencing, Neil's parents, Cliff and Yvonne, who still maintain their son's innocence, expressed their devastation to the press. They reiterated their belief that Rachel had killed Lillian and then taken her own life. They said, "We know that our son, Neil, is innocent, and we are devastated to learn that the evidence points to Rachel murdering our grandchild and then committing suicide. I knew Rachel was depressed. Our son will now go to jail for loving, honoring, and protecting his wife's memory." When a reporter asked Cliff and Yvonne if they had ever tried to help Rachel, considering they knew about her struggles, they opted not to answer. In a similar vein, Rachel's family shared their own heartache, stating that the verdict didn't erase the pain they were enduring. In August 2008, Neil Entwistle was tricked into shaving his head, thinking it would earn him the protection of a white supremacist prison gang. Instead of safety, he was met with chilling words. "It's a nice gesture on your part, but we're gonna kill you." As a result, Neil was placed in protective custody, also known as administrative segregation, or ADSEG. By December, he was transferred to the Old Colony Correctional Center, a medium-security prison in Bridgewater. Fast forward to 2016, Neil's parents still insisted their son was innocent. They argued that Neil was only guilty of wanting to protect Rachel's memory. While in prison, Neil made some pen pals and shared a new version of what happened that day. He claimed he never left the house. He was in the kitchen when he suddenly heard gunshots from upstairs. He ran up to find Rachel had shot Lillian and then saw Rachel take her own life. In 2023, Neil claimed that a juror, who was the same height as Rachel, standing at 5 feet 2 inches, violated his rights by reenacting the murder in the jury room. He argued that this reenactment wasn't following proper rules of evidence, and he has been pushing for a new trial, but his request was denied once again. It was clear that Neil was a deeply troubled individual, fixated on how others perceived him. This obsession ultimately brought about his downfall. Ironically, the man who desperately sought a lavish lifestyle now finds himself behind bars, with many people agreeing that he got what he deserved. What do you think? Is he right to seek a new trial, or is it time for him to face the consequences of his actions? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.